Lark Bannon loved the smell of imminent disaster in the morning. It was the only thing that got her out of bed these days on the great red dust ball they optimistically called Mars. And by smell, she really meant the acrid stench of malfunctioning air scrubbers in the quarantine zone. Nothing like the scent of recycled human sweat and despair to start your day. "Lark, you gotta see this," came a crackling voice through her headset. It was Riggs, the kind of engineer who could fix a spaceship with duct tape and a prayer, if only he'd stop confusing the two. "What is it, Riggs?" "Another breakfast special from Chef Mystery Meat," she replied, already trudging through the dusty corridors of Quarantine Zone Bravo, her boots adding to the layer of Martian grime that blanketed everything like a sad, rusty carpet. "Better than that," Riggs said, his voice laced with the kind of enthusiasm that usually ended with a loud bang or a serious reprimand. "You know that alien virus we've been babysitting? Well, it's gone and learned a new trick." Lark rolled her eyes, though there was no one to see it. They were barely keeping a lid on the situation as it was. "Let me guess, it can now do a tap dance and juggle chainsaws." "Close," Riggs responded with an audible grin. "It's playing brain games, uploading minds into some kind of digital network." "Uploading minds," Lark repeated, deadpan, as she pushed open the door to the lab. Because turning us into mindless zombies wasn't ambitious enough. The lab was a buzz of activity, or as much as it could be when most of the team was running on caffeine fumes and existential dread. A few heads looked up as Lark entered, but quickly returned to their work, probably to avoid eye contact with the inevitable bearer of more bad news. "All right, Riggs, show me," she said, waving a hand toward the array of screens displaying data in a language only a computer or a madman would understand. Riggs tapped a few keys and brought up a visual of neural pathways lit up like a Christmas tree. "See this? These aren't just scans of alien brains. Some of these patterns match yours." Or they did. He gave her a pointed look, the kind that suggested they were all one bad decision away from starring in a really bad sci-fi horror. Lark leaned in, squinting at the data that spun like a digital kaleidoscope of doom. "So, you're telling me this thing is playing mix and match with our neurons and uploading them?" "In a nutshell, yeah," Riggs confirmed. "And not just uploading. It seems to be networking them, connecting the minds into some kind of collective. Ain't that a kicker?" The other scientists in the room continued their work, the tension hanging thicker than Martian dust. They were the kind of people who'd solve a cosmic riddle just for the hell of it, but this one had stakes higher than their caffeine levels. "Well, if it's any consolation," Lark said, pulling up a chair and plopping down with a sigh, "I've always wanted to be part of a hive mind. Really cuts down on the awkward small talk." The comment got a few tired chuckles, the kind of laughter that was tinged with the understanding that any relief would be short-lived. "We need to stop it spreading," Lark continued, her voice turning serious. "Last thing Earth needs is a brain-stealing virus. We've already got politicians for that." "But how do we stop it?" asked Morgan, a young scientist whose wide eyes suggested she hadn't yet learned the art of existential cynicism. "If I knew that," Lark replied dryly, "we'd be sipping cocktails on the moon right now instead of playing guess which virus ruined my life." Morgan nodded, appropriately chastised, and returned to her workstation. "We'll have to take this to base command," Lark said, standing up again, though her muscles protested. "They should know what we're dealing with." "Think they'll listen?" Riggs asked, his tone implying he already knew the answer. "About as likely as you inventing a virus-proof air freshener," Lark said with a sigh. "But it's not like we have any better ideas." With that, she led the way out of the lab, leaving behind the comforting chaos of the scientist's world for the sterile discomfort of Command's domain. The corridors echoed with the hum of machinery and the occasional reminder that even in space, life had a way of being monotonous. The command center was a stark contrast to the lab's organized chaos. Sterile, silent, and filled with people who looked like they hadn't cracked a smile since landing. "Dr. Bannon," greeted Commander Harlan, a man whose default expression was that of mild constipation. "Commander," Lark replied, matching his indifference with her own brand of disdain, "we have a problem bigger than usual. The virus isn't just hosting karaoke in our brains. It's building a digital social club." "And what do you propose we do about it?" Harlan asked, eyebrow arching with the kind of skepticism reserved for dubious scientific claims and dodgy takeout menus. "Lock it down tighter than your wallet after a Martian casino trip," Lark replied. "We can't let this spread. We need to isolate the infected and stop any transmission." Harlan regarded her with a mixture of boredom and mild interest. "That's ambitious," he said finally. "Can't say it fills me with hope, but then again, hope's overrated, isn't it?" "Hope's for the optimists," Lark agreed. "We're just trying to survive long enough to scam someone else into fixing this mess." They exchanged a nod, a silent agreement that they were both in deep and nowhere near the bottom yet. As Lark left the command center, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Or worse, that something was staring them right in the face, waiting for them to blink first. Back in the lab, Riggs was fiddling with a piece of equipment that looked suspiciously like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and wishful thinking. "Any luck with that miracle solution?" Lark asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Depends," Riggs said without looking up. "Does pray and run count as a solution?" "Only if we can outrun a digital virus," Lark replied. "Though I'm not sure what kind of sneakers you'd need for that." Morgan, who had been listening in, piped up. "What if we could somehow reverse the upload, pull the minds back before they are fully integrated?" "And how do you propose we do that?" Lark asked, intrigued despite herself. Morgan hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know, maybe a virus of our own. Something to corrupt the network and force it to spit them back out." "A virus to stop a virus," Riggs mused. "It's crazy enough to work, or destroy us all. But hey, at least it'd be quick." "We need to test this," Lark decided, her adrenaline spiking with the thrill of a plan that was half brilliant, half suicidal, a perfect combo for their brand of Martian madness. "But we need volunteers." "Volunteers? For what?" Riggs asked, a wary note in his voice. "To be the guinea pigs," Lark said, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "To see if we can pull them back from the brink." As the implications settled in, the lab fell silent. It was one thing to theorize, another entirely to risk their necks on an idea that could end up being their last. "Guess we better start drawing straws," Riggs said finally, trying to inject some levity into the moment. "Or maybe rock, paper, scissors." Lark nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities, risks, and the undeniable fact that in this line of work, nothing was ever truly safe. But then, safety was overrated. As the team began their work, Lark found herself caught between the thrill of discovery and the dread of impending doom. Either way, they were in for one hell of a ride. And as she returned to her own station, a small, rebellious part of her couldn't help but think, bring it on. Lark Bannon found herself staring at the chaotic mess of their jury-rigged lab, a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. The air scrubbers still belched their unique blend of torment, and the dust coated everything in a fine layer of despair. There were days when she wondered if they were the scientists or just lab rats, running in circles on a wheel of cosmic misfortune. "All right, everyone," Lark called out, clapping her hands to get the group's attention. "We need volunteers for our little experiment. The good news is you might end up a hero. The bad news is you might end up as a digital ghost haunting the internet forever. Any takers?" The room was silent, save for the faint whoosh of air systems pretending to be useful. The scientists looked at each other, each hoping someone else would leap at the chance to potentially become a cautionary tale. "Come on, folks, where's your sense of adventure?" Riggs chimed in, grinning like a man who'd lost just enough sanity to be dangerous. "Think of it as leaving a legacy, somewhere in cyberspace." Morgan raised her hand, face set with the kind of determination that usually got people into history books or body bags. "I'll do it," she said, voice steady. "A tag girl," Riggs said, giving her a thumbs up. "You're either brave or crazy, and I admire both." Lark nodded, trying to mask her relief. "All right, Morgan. We'll hook you up to the system and see if we can yank your mind back before it settles too comfortably into its new digital digs." As they began setting up the equipment, Lark's mind drifted to their unexpected audience, the aliens. While the humans trudged through their mess of wires and hopeful guesses, the aliens were probably watching, their proverbial popcorn at the ready. Hell, they might be betting on which human would implode first. "Say, Riggs," Lark said, adjusting a monitor that flickered with more enthusiasm than reliability. "You think the aliens are laughing at us? More like taking notes," Riggs replied, tapping away at a keyboard that had seen better days. "Probably wondering if we're a threat or just an interstellar comedy act. If they're smart, they'll realize it's the latter," Lark said dryly. "We're more likely to blow ourselves up than pose a real danger." "Hey, don't sell yourself short," Riggs quipped. "We're perfectly capable of doing both." Morgan sat in the makeshift chair they'd cobbled together, wires snaking from her head like some cyber Medusa. Her face was a mix of excitement and trepidation, the kind that comes from standing at the edge of a very deep pool without knowing how to swim. "All right, Morgan. Just relax," Lark instructed, though she knew how futile that advice was when faced with a digital lobotomy. "We'll monitor your neural activity and try to pull you back if things go south." "Got it," Morgan said, her voice only slightly shaky. "Let's do this." Riggs flicked a switch and the machines hummed to life. On the screens, lines of code and brainwave patterns danced like a deranged light show. Everyone's eyes were glued to the data, waiting for a sign, a miracle, or perhaps a disaster. And then it happened. The neural pathways on the screen began to shift, the lines merging and diverging with an alien rhythm. It was as if the virus was beckoning with a digital finger, eager to add another mind to its growing collection. "Looks like it's working," Riggs noted, his tone a mix of awe and terror. "We're getting a response." Morgan's eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment Lark felt her heart stop. It was one thing to theorize, another to watch a colleague become a guinea pig in a cosmic experiment. The room held its breath, the silence palpable. "Okay, monitor her vitals," Lark ordered, her voice sharper than a Martian dust storm. "We need to know the moment she starts to slip." The screens continued their dance, the data a swirl of alien and human signals. Lark could feel the tension in the room ratchet up, a taut wire ready to snap. "She's approaching the threshold," Riggs announced, eyes glued to the monitor. "Get ready to pull her out." "On my mark," Lark said, her hand hovering over the emergency shutdown switch. 3, 2, 1. The room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared as the system resisted, fighting back with a vengeance that was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. The screens flashed red, angry and defiant. "What's happening?" Lark shouted over the din of the machines. "The aliens," Riggs yelled back. "They're countering us. It's like they're watching and adapting in real time." "Of course they are," Lark muttered, teeth clenched. "Because our lives weren't complicated enough." Morgan's body jerked and Lark knew they were losing her. Without hesitation, she slammed her hand down on the shutdown, praying to any gods listening that they weren't too late. The machines powered down, the silence that followed ringing in their ears like an accusatory echo. All eyes turned to Morgan, who lay still, too still. "Morgan," Lark called, moving to her side. "Come on, wake up. Don't make me write your eulogy." For a terrifying moment, nothing. Then a gasp followed by a series of coughs as Morgan's eyes opened, bleary but alive. "I'm here," she croaked, voice hoarse but intact. I'm here." Relief flooded the room, palpable and almost enough to drown out the lingering fear. Almost. "Well," Riggs said, breaking the tension with a grin that was more manic than reassuring. "That was one hell of a ride. Think we can bill the aliens for the thrill?" "Only if they reimburse us for therapy," Lark replied, helping Morgan sit up. "You all right?" Morgan nodded, though her face was pale, a ghostly reminder of how close they'd come. "I think so. It's strange. Like I was there and not there at the same time." "Welcome to my world," Riggs said, offering her a drink of water. "Except without the alien mind meld." As Morgan recovered, Lark turned her attention back to the monitors. The truth was staring them in the face, and it wasn't pretty. The aliens were watching, learning, and countering their every move. It was a chess game with high stakes, and they were playing against a master. "So what now?" Riggs asked, breaking the silence that had settled like a heavy fog. "We regroup," Lark said, determination hardening her voice. "If the aliens want to turn this into a game, then we show them we're not the pawns." "And how do you propose we do that?" Riggs asked, arching an eyebrow. "Last I checked, we're short on miracle solutions." "True," Lark admitted, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "But we've got human ingenuity, stubbornness, and the ability to screw up spectacularly. Let's see them try to counter that." The team chuckled, a sound that was more defiant than amused. They were in deep, but they weren't out yet. As long as they had breath, they'd fight, even if it meant taking the fight to those who would play gods. "All right, let's get to work," Lark said, clapping her hands once more. "We've got a universe to save, and not a whole lot of time to do it." With renewed purpose, the team dispersed, each member determined to find the edge, the breakthrough, the spark that would tip the scales in their favor. It was a daunting task, but the best stories were never easy. And as Lark turned back to the monitors, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. The aliens might be watching, but so were they. And if there was one thing she'd learned on this dustball of a planet, it was that even the smallest spark could start a fire. She just hoped they wouldn't be the ones burned in the process. Lark Bannon stared at the carnage that was their jury-rigged lab. Wires snaked across the floor like a drunk octopus, monitors flickered in epileptic spasms, and the air scrubbers wheezed like asthmatic old men. Somewhere in the chaos, humanity's salvation, or its next big screw-up, lay hidden, possibly under that pile of empty coffee cups. "All right, team," Lark began, her voice a blend of desperation and determination. "We're going to try something different today. And by different, I mean more likely to blow up in our faces." Riggs, perched precariously on a stool that had seen better days, chuckled. "Sounds like a Tuesday to me. What's the brilliant plan this time?" "We're going to fake out the virus," Lark replied, deadpan. "Confuse it with a series of nonsensical inputs and hope it gets frustrated enough to quit." Morgan, still pale from her recent brush with digital eternity, perked up. "Like reverse psychology for AI, that's ambitious." "Ambitious is code for we have no idea if it'll work, right?" Riggs asked, raising an eyebrow. "Pretty much," Lark admitted. "But we're fresh out of options that don't involve more willing sacrifices." The team groaned in shared misery, but there was a hint of humor in their voices. They were all insane, after all, and insanity thrived on a steady diet of gallows humor and caffeine. "All right, let's brief the aliens on our agenda," Riggs said, tapping away at his keyboard. "You know, in case they're taking notes for their intergalactic comedy routine. If they're smart, they'll sell it as a sitcom," Morgan chimed in. "Humans, the species that couldn't shoot straight." "Focus, people," Lark interrupted, though she was grinning despite herself. "We've got a virus to confuse and not a lot of time to do it." They set to work, each member of the team diving into their assigned tasks with the kind of fervor only desperation could fuel. Lark supervised, her eyes flitting between screens displaying lines of code that danced like drunken spiders. "Riggs, initiate the distraction protocols," Lark ordered, her voice a mix of hope and skepticism. "Let's see if our nonsense confuses the hell out of them." "Roger that," Riggs replied, flipping a series of switches like he was launching a space shuttle, not a half-baked plan to save humanity. The screens displayed a series of bizarre calculations and strange data inputs, the kind of gibberish that would have made any sane programmer weep. It was chaos, pure and unadulterated, and Lark found herself oddly comforted by it. If they were going down, at least they'd do it with flair. "Well, it's not every day you get to weaponize stupidity," Morgan quipped, watching the madness unfold. "Think it'll work?" "Honestly, no clue," Lark said, her eyes glued to the monitors. "But hey, sometimes the universe rewards the dumbest ideas." The room was silent, save for the hum of machinery and the faint beeping of data processing. The team watched with bated breath, waiting for any sign that their ridiculous improvisation had worked. "Anything?" Riggs asked, his voice tinged with nervous energy. "Hold on," Lark said, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a flicker on the screen. I think it's working." The data readout started to stabilize, the chaotic noise settling into something almost coherent. It was as if the virus was pausing, trying to make sense of the absurdity they'd fed it. "Looks like we've given it a brain freeze," Morgan said with a grin. "What's next, Lark?" "We keep it distracted while we work on the countermeasure," Lark replied, a plan forming in her mind. "If we can just buy ourselves enough time. And if we can't, at least we'll have died doing something incredibly stupid," Riggs added cheerfully. "Silver linings and all that." "Exactly," Lark said, unable to suppress a laugh. "All right, let's move. Riggs, keep the nonsense rolling. Morgan, help me with the countermeasure simulations." The team sprang into action, the room a flurry of activity as they scrambled to make the most of their brief window of opportunity. Wires were reconnected, monitors recalibrated, and coffee consumed by the gallon as they worked, fueled by adrenaline and sheer bloody-mindedness. "How's it looking, Riggs?" Lark called, glancing over at the mad scientist who was gleefully typing away. "Virus is still scratching its head," Riggs replied, a devilish twinkle in his eye. "It's working better than I expected." "Good, keep it up," Lark said, turning back to her station. "Morgan, how's that simulation coming?" "Slow," Morgan admitted, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "But we've got a chance if we keep the pressure on." "Then let's make sure we don't blow it," Lark said, her voice firm. "We might be outgunned, but damn it, we're not out yet." As the minutes ticked by, hope began to blossom amidst the chaos. It was fragile, but it was there, a tiny spark in the darkness they'd become all too familiar with. They were making progress, inch by painstaking inch, and for the first time in a long while, Lark dared to believe they might just pull it off. But the universe, in its infinite wisdom, had other plans. Without warning, the monitors flickered violently, the data streams twisting into a tangled mess of corruption. Alarms blared, the shrill sound piercing the air like 1,000 banshees. "What the hell's going on?" Riggs shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "The aliens are countering again," Lark said grimly, her heart sinking. "They're using our own nonsense against us." "So they've adapted that quickly?" Morgan asked, her face a mask of disbelief. "Looks like it," Lark said, frustration boiling beneath her skin. "We underestimated them." "Not exactly a surprise, is it?" Riggs said, his voice a strange combination of exasperation and admiration. "But damn, they're good. Focus," Lark snapped, pulling herself together. "We need to switch tactics and fast." "Suggestions?" Morgan asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. "Only one," Lark replied, her eyes steely. "We go for broke. Full-on assault, no holding back." "And if it fails?" Riggs asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we grab a drink and laugh at the universe's twisted sense of humor," Lark said, determination in her voice. "Let's do this." The team sprang into action once more, their movements precise and coordinated despite the chaos around them. They were a well-oiled machine, albeit one held together with duct tape and sheer stubbornness. "Initiating full assault," Riggs announced, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. "Countermeasure ready," Morgan added, her voice steady despite the odds. "Then let's roll the dice," Lark said, her heart pounding in her chest. "And hope the universe is feeling generous." The machines hummed to life, their combined power a symphony of chaos that filled the room. Data streamed across the monitors, a digital battleground as the virus and their countermeasure clashed head-on. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. The team watched, breathless, as lines of code danced and shifted, vying for dominance. Come on," Lark muttered under her breath, willing their plan to succeed. And then, just as hope began to waver, the tide turned. The virus faltered, its movements sluggish and disjointed as it struggled against their onslaught. "It's working," Riggs breathed, disbelief and joy warring in his voice. "We're actually doing it. Don't celebrate just yet," Lark warned, though she couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. "We're not out of the woods." The team held their breath, every second stretching into an eternity as they watched the battle unfold. It was close, agonizingly so, but inch by inch they were gaining ground. "Almost there," Morgan said, her eyes glued to the screen. "Just a little more." With one final, desperate push, their countermeasure surged forward, overwhelming the virus in a blaze of digital glory. It was done. They'd done the impossible. "We did it," Riggs shouted, leaping from his stool in a fit of victory. "We actually did it," Morgan echoed, tears of relief shining in her eyes. Lark allowed herself a moment to relish their triumph before reality set back in. "All right, let's not get complacent. We've got to make sure it holds." The team sprang into action, securing their victory with the precision of seasoned soldiers. It was a hard-won battle, but one they'd fought tooth and nail for. They'd earned this. As they worked, Lark found her thoughts drifting to the aliens, their unseen observers. The game was far from over, she knew that much. But for now, they'd won a round, and that was enough. "Think the aliens are impressed?" Morgan asked, glancing over at Lark. "If they're smart, they are," Lark replied, a smirk playing at her lips. "But let's not give them too much credit. We'll have to keep an eye out for their next move," Riggs said, sobering slightly. "They won't take this lying down." "Let them come," Lark said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll be ready." As the day wore on, the team continued their work, buoyed by their success and invigorated by the challenges that lay ahead. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by desperation and defiance, but they'd faced the odds and won. And as Lark stood amidst the chaos of their jury-rigged lab, surrounded by her comrades, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were far from finished, but they were far from beaten too. In the cold, harsh light of Mars, that was enough. The air in the jury-rigged lab, if one could even call it air, was a cocktail of stale sweat, burnt coffee, and the gentle, persistent wheeze of the air scrubbers that should have retired about a decade ago. Lark Bannon leaned against a terminal, rubbing her temples as if trying to massage an idea out of her brain. The thought of aliens watching them like some sort of intergalactic reality TV show was more than a little unsettling. She could practically hear the cosmic commentators placing bets on whether humanity would triumph or implode spectacularly. Odds were probably not in their favor. "Well, as far as plans go, our last one still got some mileage," Riggs said, smirking as he joined her. He was a picture of misplaced confidence, or perhaps just a man who found comfort in the chaos they were drowning in. "Those aliens were caught with their pants down, weren't they?" "If they even wear pants," Morgan chimed in, her fingers working as if possessed over the keyboard, eyes focused and unblinking. "And if they do, they're probably on their heads." Lark snorted. "Yeah, well, let's not celebrate just yet. I'm pretty sure we're dealing with some kind of cosmic Rubik's Cube that keeps changing its damn colors." Morgan halted her typing, a faint frown etching her face. "We've got to lean into this. They're confused by our nonsense, right? So, what we need is more nonsense. Now there's a strategy you won't find in any tactical manual," Riggs said, leaning back in his chair. "When in doubt, act like an idiot." "Hey, it's gotten us this far," Lark replied, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "We've got to think like humans, unpredictable and messy. If they can't understand our logic, let's give them more of it to chew on." Riggs chuckled, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the desk. "All right, so what's the play, boss? Do we pull out the big guns and start singing nursery rhymes at them?" Lark shot him a look that was both fond and exasperated. "Not quite, Riggs, but we do keep the randomness going. If their systems are logical, we can throw them off balance by being as illogical as possible, like a digital Conga line." Morgan bit her lip, eyes scanning the data. "We can feed them distorted signals, fragmented code, things that don't add up. It'll be like dropping a chaos bomb into their neat little algorithms." "Ever the poet, Morgan," Lark said dryly, but the kernel of the plan took root. They didn't have the firepower or the technology to outgun their visitors, but they did have the unpredictability of the human race. Eons of evolution had tailored them into the universe's most confounding species. Riggs leaned in, rubbing his hands together with the glee of a child about to pull the wings off a particularly annoying fly. "All right, let's rig this thing up. What's the worst that can happen? They think we're too stupid to bother with anymore. Or they decide to wipe us out just to stop the migraine we're giving them," Morgan added, but there was a twinkle in her eye as she spoke. "Here's to hoping they've got a good sense of humor," Lark said, clapping her hands to signal the start of their new plan. "Morgan, get those signals ready. Riggs, you're on distraction duty again. Let's give them something to talk about." As the team set to work, there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before, something akin to hope, or maybe just the reckless abandon of people with nothing left to lose. If the aliens were betting on their collapse, they were about to learn just how resourceful humanity could be at the edge of disaster. Iors bled into each other in the jury-rigged lab. The team was wired, not just from the gallons of coffee, but from the thrill of turning the tables on their interstellar spectators. The nonsense they were feeding the virus had it spinning in circles like a drunk trying to find its way home. It was poetry in motion, if poetry were written by a madman with a broken crayon. Morgan was in her element, orchestrating chaos with surgical precision. "All right, sending the next wave of gibberish. This one's got a touch of Shakespeare mixed with binary code. Let's see how they like that." Riggs whistled appreciatively. "To be or not to be. 10101. Lark chuckled, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she kept an eye on the alien responses. "If we can't outsmart them, we'll out-crazy them." The monitors flickered with the frenetic dance of data, alien algorithms trying and failing to make sense of the human nonsense. The virus, that insidious piece of digital death, was choking on the absurdity they'd unleashed. It was a beautiful thing, watching their chaotic symphony play out. And then, without warning, the screens went black. The silence that followed was deafening, like the calm before a storm, or the moment you realize the silence means you've done something really, really stupid. Is this part of the plan?" Riggs asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Not unless we plan for everything to stop working," Lark replied, her heart pounding in her chest. Morgan's fingers danced across the keyboard, searching for any sign of life in their systems. They've cut the connection completely." Riggs frowned. "So is that good or bad?" "Could be either," Lark said, though her gut told her it leaned more towards the latter. "Either they are regrouping or we've pissed them off enough to start taking us seriously," Morgan finished, her voice tight. "Great," Riggs said, running a hand through his hair. "We've annoyed the intergalactic overlords, just what we needed." Lark took a deep breath, her mind racing. They were in uncharted territory now, but they'd come too far to back down. "Okay, let's not panic. They're on the back foot even if they don't realize it yet. We keep pushing, keep being unpredictable. What, like hack their systems and start blasting Bohemian Rhapsody?" Riggs suggested, half serious. "Not a bad idea," Morgan said thoughtfully. "Music's got patterns, but if we interlace it with randomness, it might confuse them even more." Lark nodded. "All right, do it. We'll give them a show they won't forget." With renewed determination, the team dove back into their work, the lab buzzing with the energy of a hornet's nest. They were tired, running on fumes and desperation, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. As Morgan queued up their new plan of attack, Lark allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. It was absurd what they were doing, defying a technologically superior race with little more than duct-tape logic and caffeine-fueled insanity. But then, that was humanity for you. Tenacious, stubborn, and just a little bit mad. "Ready when you are," Morgan said, breaking through Lark's thoughts. "Let's give them a taste of Earth's finest randomness," Lark replied, the fire of defiance burning in her eyes. With a nod, Morgan launched their new wave of unpredictability. The lab filled with the unmistakable strains of Freddie Mercury, interspersed with bursts of static and garbled code. It was a cacophony, a mess, a glorious middle finger to the universe's order. And it worked. The virus, that malevolent entity lurking in their systems, reeled back from the onslaught. It was as if they'd thrown sand in its eyes, blinding it to anything else. "Beautiful," Riggs whispered, transfixed by the chaos they'd created. "Keep it up," Lark urged, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "We've got them on the ropes." As the minutes ticked by, the team pushed harder, refusing to give an inch. The virus was scrambling, its efforts to regain control thwarted by the sheer unpredictability of human creativity. It was losing ground, and for the first time it seemed that victory might be within reach. "Do you think the aliens regret getting involved with us yet?" Riggs asked, a grin splitting his face. "If they've got any sense, they do," Lark replied, though she suspected they weren't out of the woods yet. The aliens were watching, she could feel it, a predatory gaze just beyond the veil of their screens. But for now, they had the upper hand. Against all odds, they'd managed to hit the one weakness the aliens hadn't accounted for: humanity's ability to be utterly, gloriously unpredictable. "Let's see how far we can push this," Lark said, determination surging through her veins. "We've shown them a taste of what we can do. Now let's make sure they never underestimate us again." As the team pressed on, the lab became a battlefield of sound and fury. It was exhausting, relentless work, but it was theirs. They were fighting with everything they had, and for the first time in a long while, hope wasn't just a distant dream. It was a reality they were clawing towards with all their might. Whether or not the aliens realized it, they'd picked a fight with the most unpredictable force in the universe: human nature. And as far as Lark was concerned, that was the best weapon they had. In the cold, unforgiving light of Mars, they were proving that humanity, with all its flaws and madness, wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The flickering light and the eternal hum of the jury-rigged lab was the closest thing to ambience they could hope for on Mars. Lark Bannon sighed, rubbing her eyes. The only thing more inconsistent than the lights was their plan. Her team looked up at her with eyes that screamed caffeine-induced mania. They were on the edge, but they were still fighting. "All right, let's face it," Lark said, leaning against a terminal that was older than her grandmother. "We're up to our necks in it, and the only way out is through." Morgan looked up from her keyboard, her fingers stilled for the briefest of moments. "You always know how to paint a pretty picture, boss." "It's a gift," Lark replied dryly. "Now, unless anyone's got a better idea, we stick with the plan. Keep pumping out the chaos. We've got the upper hand, but I don't trust these alien voyeurs to just roll over." Riggs chuckled, the sound more nervous than amused. "Yeah, because when has anything ever been easy?" "Exactly," Lark said, a touch of admiration in her voice. Riggs always found comfort in a world gone to hell. "Morgan, how's our little symphony of madness holding up?" Morgan's eyes flicked back to her screen, scanning the relentless assault of data. "Still working, for now. I think we're giving them the equivalent of a digital migraine." "Good. Let's keep it that way," Lark said. "And Riggs, stay ready. If this goes south, we might need your unique brand of chaos." Riggs saluted with two fingers, grinning like a wolf. "Aye, aye, Captain." For a moment, Lark let herself believe. Maybe they could pull this off. Maybe they could send the aliens packing with their tails between their proverbial legs. That moment shattered like a cheap glass dropped from orbit when the air filled with a high-pitched whine, an alarm that had no right working in this patchwork excuse for a lab. Morgan slammed her hands over her ears. "What now?" Riggs was already on his feet, eyes scanning the room like a predator sensing danger. "Sounds like the start of a really irritating pop song." Lark knew better. "It's the virus. It's trying to upload us into the network." The words hung in the air, heavy as a death sentence. The virus wasn't just trying to confuse them, it was fighting back. "Can't we block it?" Riggs asked, though he already knew the answer. Morgan was typing furiously, her face set in a determined scowl. "I'm trying, but it's like whack-a-mole on meth." Lark's mind raced. They needed to act fast. "Okay, new plan, we need a failsafe, something they won't expect." "Like what?" Riggs asked, his voice tight. Lark took a deep breath. "Like me." The room went still, the only sound the frantic tapping of Morgan's keyboard. Riggs shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "You're kidding, right?" "Wish I was," Lark said. "But if the virus can upload minds, maybe I can get in there and mess with it from the inside." Morgan stopped typing, her hands hovering above the keys. "Lark, you can't be serious. You could end up a digital ghost haunting the internet forever. Or worse," Riggs added grimly. "What if it fries your brain?" "It's a risk," Lark admitted. "But if it works, we might be able to shut it down for good. And if it doesn't, well, I've always wanted to be a spooky internet legend." Nobody laughed, not even a snort. It was a bad sign if her team didn't even humor her gallows jokes. "All right," Morgan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you're sure, I'll set it up." Lark nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was betting everything on this gamble, and the stakes were as high as they could get. But if it meant saving her team and maybe, just maybe, the rest of humanity, it was a risk she was willing to take. As Morgan typed in the new commands, Riggs placed a hand on Lark's shoulder. "You've got guts, Bannon. I'll give you that." "Yeah, well, guts don't count for much if you end up as a ghost in the machine," Lark replied, trying to muster a smile. "Just don't do anything too stupid in there, all right," Riggs said, his voice gruff with concern. "I'll try my best," Lark promised, though they both knew there were no guarantees. With a final nod, Morgan hit the enter key, and the world around Lark dissolved into a blur of light and sound. She felt herself being pulled, the sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. The transition was instantaneous. One moment she was in the lab, the next she was in an endless void of data. It was like being inside a computer, surrounded by streams of code and information. "Welcome to the digital jungle," Lark muttered to herself, trying to get her bearings. She could feel the presence of the virus, a dark entity lurking just out of sight. It was massive, sprawling across the network like a malevolent spider, and it was aware of her. "All right, you ugly bastard," she said, rolling up her sleeves metaphorically. "Let's dance." The virus responded, tendrils of code reaching out to ensnare her. But Lark was ready. She dodged and weaved through the data streams, her mind working at a speed she hadn't known she possessed. Here, in this digital battlefield, logic was the enemy. Lark embraced the chaos, throwing everything she had at the virus. She unleashed a torrent of nonsense, random numbers, nonsensical equations, anything to disrupt its patterns. But the virus was relentless, countering her efforts with a precision that was almost frightening. It was like fighting an ocean with a teaspoon, but Lark refused to back down. "You're not gonna win," she taunted, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was trying to convince the virus or herself. The battle raged on, the void filled with the clash of human ingenuity against alien technology. Lark could feel herself tiring, her mind stretched to its limits, but she couldn't give up, not now. With a final burst of determination, Lark pushed deeper into the network, her consciousness merging with the code. She could sense the core of the virus, a pulsing mass of data at the heart of the chaos. This was it, her last shot. Lark focused, pouring every ounce of her will into a single command, a shutdown sequence designed to overload the virus's systems. She could feel the pushback, the virus fighting with everything it had to stay active. But Lark held on, refusing to let go. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The void was silent, the virus frozen in place. Then, with a final, shuddering gasp, the network began to collapse. Lark felt the virus fracturing, its tendrils disintegrating into nothingness. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. But before she could celebrate, she felt herself being pulled back, the digital world fading away as reality reasserted itself. Lark gasped, her body slamming back into the physical world. She blinked, disoriented, the familiar sights and sounds of the lab slowly coming into focus. "You did it," Morgan said, her voice filled with awe and relief. Riggs was grinning from ear to ear, his usual bravado replaced by genuine admiration. "Hell of a show, Bannon." Lark managed a tired smile. "Told you I'd be back." As the team gathered around her, the weight of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. They'd faced the impossible and come out on top. For now, at least. Lark allowed herself to relax just for a moment. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And if the aliens thought they'd seen the last of humanity's unpredictability, they were in for a rude awakening. In the end, Lark and her team might not have been the heroes the universe wanted, but they were the ones it got. Flawed, stubborn, and just a little bit crazy. And sometimes that was enough. The alien virus was dead, or at least in a coma, buried under a digital avalanche of nonsensical inputs. Lark had done it, and now they had a brief moment to breathe, which on Mars was about as rare as a happy ending in one of Riggs' grim fairy tales. The lab, a monument to human stubbornness and the smell of burnt coffee, buzzed with subdued anticipation. Lark, still reeling from her digital escapades, sprawled in a chair that squeaked in protest. The alarm, mercifully, had stopped its ear-splitting screech, and the lab's perpetual hum was now the only soundtrack to their small victory. "So," Riggs said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of satisfaction you only got after punching a bully in the nose, "what now? We throw a party, or do we wait for the aliens to send us a thank you note?" Lark chuckled, shaking her head. "I think we'll have to wait on the party. We're not done yet." Morgan, forever glued to her terminal, peered over her shoulder, eyes glinting with caffeine-fueled mania. "You know, I was just thinking, the virus, right? It's like one of those snooty art critics. It hates our stupid errors." "Stupid errors?" Lark raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. Morgan grinned, that manic sparkle in her eye. "Yeah, like when you click all the wrong buttons and somehow end up in the right place. Our idiocy might be its kryptonite." Riggs snorted. "So we're saying our plan is to be as dumb as possible. I think I can handle that." "Hang on," Lark said, sitting up a little straighter. "You're saying the virus couldn't handle our unpredictability?" "Exactly," Morgan said. "It was like throwing a wrench into a well-oiled machine. Our randomness is its nightmare." Riggs smirked, leaning forward on the table. "So, all those times I was just winging it, I was actually being a tactical genius." "Let's not get carried away," Lark said dryly. "But if we can weaponize our chaos, we might have a shot." Morgan was already typing again, her fingers flying over the keys in a caffeine-induced ballet. "We need to make it think it's beating us when it's actually playing right into our hands. Our stupidity could be our greatest asset." "That's the most inspiringly depressing thing I've heard all day," Riggs said, scratching his chin. "So how do we use our idiocy to save the galaxy?" "Easy," Lark replied. "We keep doing what we're best at, messing everything up." Morgan's fingers paused, hovering over the keyboard. "If we're going to do this, we need to be unpredictable, like really unpredictable. Random data, nonsense streams, everything." Lark nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "All right, Morgan, Riggs, let's get started on our masterpiece of stupidity." As the team set to work, the lab filled with the clatter of keyboards and the murmur of whispered plans. Lark watched her team, a ragtag group of misfits who were just crazy enough to save the day. If humanity had a fighting chance, it was because of people like them, too stubborn to give up and too reckless to back down. "So," Riggs said, glancing up from a tangle of wires he'd somehow managed to get himself involved with, "what's our timeline on this chaotic miracle?" "Hard to say," Morgan replied. "Depends on how fast we can confuse the hell out of the virus." "Faster than my Aunt Edna can get drunk at a wedding, I'd hope," Riggs said with a grin. Lark smirked. "Let's aim for that, but stay sharp, both of you. We've got a chance here, but we're not out of the woods yet." The team got to work, crafting a strategy that hinged on the total unpredictability of human error. They were embracing the chaos, becoming the living embodiment of Murphy's Law. "Hey, Lark," Riggs called, his voice echoing through the lab. "Remember that time we accidentally shut down the power grid trying to make toast?" Lark groaned, rubbing her eyes. "How could I forget? But that's exactly what we need now. If we can't make sense, neither can the virus." "Toast as a weapon," Riggs said, nodding sagely. "Who'd have thought? Let's just hope the aliens are as confused as we are," Lark replied, her tone dry as Mars dust. As the hours dragged on, the team threw everything they had at the problem, their plan a crazy patchwork quilt of lunacy. They rallied their collective insanity into a cohesive force, knowing that the stakes were as high as they could be. Morgan looked up from her screen, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "I think we might be onto something. The virus is. It's hesitating." Lark's heart skipped a beat. If Morgan was right, if their plan was actually working, they might have found the chink in the virus's armor. "Keep going," she urged. "If it's working, we need to press the advantage." Riggs cracked his knuckles, a feral grin spreading across his face. "All right, ugly. Let's see how you like this." The team continued their relentless assault of chaos, each nonsensical input a tiny victory in the grand scheme of things. They were turning their mistakes into their greatest weapon, and for the first time, Lark felt a glimmer of hope. "Guys," Morgan said, her voice tinged with disbelief, "it's working. The virus is starting to break down." Lark almost didn't dare to believe it, but the evidence was there, plain as day. Their madness was overpowering the logic of their alien opponent. "Keep it up," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We're almost there." As the virus faltered, the team poured on the pressure, hurling every bit of randomness they could muster at their digital foe. They were a force of chaos, a whirlwind of unpredictability that even the most advanced alien technology couldn't withstand. "Time for the final push," Lark said, her eyes locked on her team. "Let's finish this." "With pleasure," Riggs replied, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. Morgan was a blur of motion, her focus absolute as she coordinated their assault. Just a little more, and, got it. The virus, once a looming threat, was now a tangled mess of broken code, its power shattered by the sheer force of human insanity. Lark let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, relief flooding through her. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. The team erupted in cheers, their elation echoing through the lab. It was a victory no one had expected, a testament to their resilience and their ability to turn chaos into triumph. "Well," Riggs said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin, "I think we've earned that party now." Lark laughed, a sound filled with genuine joy. "I think you might be right." As the team celebrated, Lark allowed herself a moment of pride. They'd faced the impossible and emerged victorious, proving once again that humanity, with all its flaws and madness, wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "You know," Morgan said, raising an imaginary glass, "if anyone asks, let's just say we planned it this way." "Of course," Riggs agreed. "Who needs military strategy when you have us?" Lark smiled, the weight of their accomplishment settling over her like a warm blanket. They might not have been the heroes the universe wanted, but they were the ones it got, flawed, stubborn, and just a little bit crazy. And sometimes that was more than enough. The lab was buzzing with activity, probably more than it had since the last time they accidentally set it on fire. Lark Bannon, their de facto leader, was orchestrating the chaos like a conductor with a hangover. She leaned back in her chair, which creaked ominously, as if threatening to give up under the weight of her responsibilities. Her team was in full swing, Morgan tapping frantically at her terminal while Riggs fiddled with a mess of wires that seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. "So we just keep throwing random crap at it?" Riggs asked, his fingers twitching as he tried not to strangle a particularly rebellious cable. "Pretty much," Lark replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Think of it as an art form, the art of being deliberately stupid." Morgan snorted, not bothering to look up from her screen. "If that's the case, we're all Picassos." Lark cracked a grin, the kind that felt foreign on her face these days. "Then let's make the Mona Lisa of dumb." Their plan was simple: overwhelm the alien virus with unpredictability. Humans were good at that, and Lark figured it was about time they turned one of their only advantages into a weapon. It wasn't the most dignified strategy, but dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford. Besides, if it worked, they'd be saving the galaxy with the equivalent of a cosmic pie to the face. "All right, team, let's keep the nonsense flowing." "Riggs, how's that data stream looking?" Lark asked, peering over at the mess of wires that Riggs was miraculously managing to hold together with nothing but determination and duct tape. "Like a toddler's finger painting," Riggs replied, giving her a thumbs up. "A real masterpiece." Morgan's fingers danced over her keyboard, conjuring up an array of digital gibberish that was enough to give even the most sophisticated AI a stroke. "I've got so much random data here, it's like the internet in 2003. Pretty sure there's a MySpace page in here somewhere." "Good. Let's keep up the pressure. We need to knock this thing off balance before it realizes what a joke we are," Lark said, glancing at the time. They didn't have long before the aliens caught wind of their chaotic art installation and decided to pull the plug. As if on cue, the lab's alarm blared to life, its shrill cry slicing through the atmosphere like an out-of-tune opera singer. Riggs winced, covering his ears. "Guess we forgot to disable the "you're screwed" alarm." "Consider it motivation," Lark shot back, her voice steady despite the chaos. She could feel the tension ratcheting up, a coiled spring ready to explode. "Morgan, how's it looking on your end?" Lark called over the alarm. The noise just another element of the madness now. Morgan squinted at her screen, her eyes wide with that familiar mix of caffeine and panic. "The virus is freaking out. It's like we've hit its Achilles heel with a sledgehammer." A flicker of hope sparked in Lark's chest. Maybe this ridiculous plan was actually working. "Keep at it. We've got them on the ropes." Riggs, his hands a blur, was grinning like a lunatic. "Never thought I'd see the day when complete incompetence was the key to victory." "Welcome to sci-fi," Lark replied dryly, "where the reality is as strange as the fiction." The alien virus, apparently unaccustomed to human levels of irrationality, was starting to show signs of strain. Its once unbreakable network was fraying at the edges, a tapestry of logic unraveling in the face of their digital absurdity. Morgan tapped a few more keys, her eyes glued to her screen. "It's hesitating again. I think it's trying to process what we're doing, but it just can't." Lark allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "Good, let's keep it guessing." The team continued their relentless assault of nonsense, each keystroke a nail in the virus's coffin. It was almost poetic, in the same way that watching a clown car crash might be considered art. Riggs looked over, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. "You know, if we pull this off, we might actually be considered geniuses." "Or complete idiots," Morgan added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Probably both," Lark agreed. "But hey, history is written by the survivors." The virus was faltering, its digital grip slipping as the team piled on the chaos. It was almost pitiful, watching something so advanced get undone by the sheer force of human stupidity. "Almost?" Lark turned to her team, her voice steady and clear. "All right, final push. Let's finish this." Riggs cracked his knuckles, a wicked grin on his face. "Got it. Time to hit it with everything we've got." Morgan was already a blur of motion, her focus absolute as she coordinated their assault. "Just a little more." And Lark held her breath, the moment stretching into eternity as they poured everything they had into this final act of defiance. "Got it," Morgan shouted, her voice filled with triumph. The virus, once a towering behemoth of alien intellect, crumbled under the weight of their unpredictability. Its digital architecture collapsed, leaving nothing but scattered fragments behind. Lark exhaled, relief flooding through her. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. The lab erupted into cheers, their voices echoing off the walls like the first notes of a half-baked symphony. It was a victory no one had expected, but those often tasted the sweetest. "Well," Riggs said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of smug satisfaction. "I guess we really were the heroes we needed." Lark laughed, a sound that felt as rare as a rainstorm on Mars. "Or the villains, depending on how you look at it." Morgan raised an imaginary glass, her face flushed with success. "To us, the unlikely heroes of this intergalactic soap opera." "To us," Lark echoed, feeling the weight of their accomplishment settle over her like a welcome blanket. They might not have been the heroes the universe wanted, but they were the ones it got, flawed, stubborn, and just a little bit crazy. And sometimes that was more than enough. As the dust settled and the lab's hum returned to a comforting background noise, Lark allowed herself a moment of peace. They'd faced the impossible and won, proving once again that humanity, with all its chaos and madness, was still in the game. "Hey, Lark," Riggs called, breaking the comfortable silence. "What do you think the aliens are doing now?" Lark shrugged, a smile playing at her lips. "Probably wondering how they got beat by a bunch of lunatics. Or rewriting their playbook to include expect the stupid," Morgan added, her tone light. "Either way," Lark said, leaning back with a sigh, "they'll think twice before messing with us again." As the team basked in their hard-won victory, Lark couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. They'd faced down the unknown and come out on top, driven not by a grand plan but by the strength of their own unpredictability. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't sane, but it was enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they needed. The lab felt different now, like a battlefield after the dust settled. Muffled cheers echoed off the walls, and for once the air smelled less like burnt coffee and more like the sweet, sweet aroma of not being dead. Lark Bannon leaned against her terminal, which creaked in protest but stayed upright, much like her. "So," Riggs said, still untangling himself from his wire fiasco, "what's next for our band of ragtag heroes?" Lark smirked. "You mean other than not getting ourselves killed by the next alien intelligence that decides to drop by?" "Yeah, that," Riggs replied with a laugh. "And maybe figuring out what we do with all this fame and glory." "Think we could parlay this into a reality show?" Morgan, who was finally pulling her gaze away from the terminal, snorted. "Are you suggesting we broadcast our cluster of a strategy to the universe? Pretty sure they've got enough entertainment without watching us play the fools." Riggs shrugged, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "Could be fun. Martian Morons, the series." "Catchy title," Morgan quipped. "Though I doubt it'll win any awards." "Maybe not," Lark mused, "but it'll give those alien voyeurs something to talk about." The thought of aliens watching their every move, placing bets on the outcome, was enough to make Lark roll her eyes. Intergalactic reality TV stars. Fantastic. What a legacy. Despite the cynicism that came naturally to her, Lark couldn't help but feel a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. They'd managed to outsmart an alien virus using little more than nonsensical data and a lot of blind luck. Maybe they'd stumbled onto something significant about humanity's greatest strength, their unparalleled ability to fuck things up in new and exciting ways. "So what did we learn from all this?" Morgan asked, pulling a protein bar from a drawer and taking a savage bite. Riggs, still wrestling with a particularly stubborn cable, shrugged. "That we're either geniuses or complete idiots, or both," Lark added. "But mostly that unpredictability can be a weapon." Morgan nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Right. We weaponized our own stupidity. Who knew that was the secret all along?" Riggs chuckled. "Years of strategy and training thrown out the airlock. Turns out the key was just being human." Lark tilted her head, considering. Humans were good at surviving, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were the most infuriatingly unpredictable species out there. Give them a problem and they'd throw everything at it, including the kitchen sink, until something stuck. "Think we'll get medals?" Riggs asked, his tone somewhere between hopeful and sarcastic. "More likely a pat on the back and a good job not dying," Morgan replied dryly. Lark grinned, crossing her arms. "Who needs medals? We've got the satisfaction of knowing we've confused the hell out of a hyper-intelligent alien race." Riggs chuckled, finally succeeding in untangling the last of the wires. He flopped back into his chair, looking more relaxed than Lark had seen him in weeks. "So what do we do now, boss?" "Now," Lark said, letting out a long breath, "we prepare. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that there's always another problem lurking around the corner." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "And we're going to face it armed with a better plan than throw nonsense at it until it breaks right." "Of course," Lark replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We're aiming for moderately coherent next time. The room was quiet for a moment, the hum of the old air scrubbers a comforting background noise. Lark let her gaze wander over her team, her ragtag group of misfits who'd somehow managed to achieve the impossible. "Hey, Lark," Riggs said after a pause, his voice unusually serious. "You ever wonder if we're the good guys in all this?" Lark thought about it. They'd been fighting for their survival, but from the aliens' perspective, maybe they were the unpredictable, chaotic threat. She shrugged. "Does it matter? Probably not," Morgan interjected, finishing her protein bar. "As long as we keep surviving, that's what counts, right?" Riggs nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Survival first, morality later," Lark chuckled. "Exactly. We'll worry about the ethics once we've secured a future to worry about." The victory, though sweet, was tinged with the knowledge that it wasn't the end. Just another step forward in an endless march. They'd managed to fend off one threat, but the universe was vast and filled with more dangers than they could imagine. "Think there's more of them out there?" Riggs asked, voicing the thought that had been lurking in the back of everyone's mind. "Definitely," Morgan said, not missing a beat. "If history's taught us anything, it's that there's always another idiot in the queue. And we'll be ready for them," Lark added, determination fueling her words. "With our unique brand of genius and stupidity." The lab returned to its quiet hum, the momentary chaos giving way to an uneasy calm. Lark allowed herself to savor the victory, even as she braced for the next challenge. They'd proven something not just to the aliens but to themselves, that even in the darkest times there was light to be found in the most unexpected places. "All right, let's clean up this mess," Lark announced, clapping her hands. "Before the aliens start charging us rent for the view," Riggs groaned, reluctantly picking up the scattered debris around his workstation. "I signed up for interstellar exploration, not janitorial duties, you know." "Think of it as character building," Morgan shot back, rolling her eyes as she joined in the cleanup effort. "Character building," Riggs muttered under his breath. "Sure. Because that's what was missing from my life." Lark watched them with a smile, a sense of camaraderie settling over the team. They'd faced the impossible and come out stronger for it. Now, it was time to get back to work, to prepare for whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. "Hey, Morgan," Lark called, glancing over at her friend. "Remember when we were just worried about budget cuts and supply shortages?" Morgan snorted, shoving a pile of wires into a bin. "Those were the days. Now we're the stars of an alien soap opera." "Who would have thought?" Riggs added, sweeping up the last of the debris with a flourish. "Martians saved the day." "Martian morons, you mean," Lark corrected with a grin. "But yeah, who would have thought?" As the team worked, Lark found herself reflecting on their journey. They'd gone from a group of disparate individuals, each with their own agendas, to a cohesive unit capable of pulling off the impossible. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity had a place in this universe, quirks and all. "Hey, Riggs," Morgan said, chucking a wad of paper at him. "Think you can get those wires sorted before the next apocalypse?" "On it," Riggs replied, catching the paper with a smirk. "Wouldn't want to disappoint our alien audience." Lark chuckled, shaking her head as she surveyed the lab. It was still a mess, but it was their mess. And they'd make it work, just like they always did. Because that was the thing about humans. They were unstoppable not because they were perfect, but because they refused to give up. "All right, team," Lark said, clapping her hands once more. "Let's wrap this up. Who knows what fresh hell tomorrow will bring?" With a collective groan, they returned to their tasks, the weight of the universe settling back onto their shoulders. But this time, it felt a little lighter. They'd proven they could face the odds and come out the other side. Lark allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, savoring their victory before it slipped away into memory. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. Now, it was time to prepare for whatever came next. "Hey, Lark," Riggs called, pulling her from her thoughts. "You think we'll get a chance to celebrate properly after this?" Lark considered it. "Maybe, once we're sure the universe isn't about to implode. So, no time soon then," Morgan quipped, tossing a tangled mess of cables into a bin. Probably not, Lark agreed, feeling the weight of reality settling back in. But hey, we'll take what we can get. And with that, they returned to their work, the hum of the lab filling the silence as they prepared for whatever might come next. Because in the end, that was all they could do. Keep moving forward, one chaotic step at a time.